Dapol have made a superb model, and I really have fallen in love with this tank car. A big hello to you, welcome back to the channel, I hope I found you well. I'm Jennifer Kirk, welcome you up here to the loft on Weir Yard. And today we're going supersized, we're going O-Gauge with Dapol, who have very kindly sent over for review one of their all-new Class B tanker wagons in O-Gauge. And this is something that when it did arrive, it felt incredibly heavy. I actually had to check the box that there wasn't a brick hidden away in there because it's got so much mass in it. And mass in model form is really good because not only does it mean that it runs better, runs more prototypically, but it has that inertia that's more like the full-size prototype. And I'm really excited to put this wagon through its paces. It's a new model and a completely different tanker wagon from those that have already been in the Dapol O-Gauge range. Dapol have done very well in breaking the tradition that O-Gauge is the preserve of only those with very deep pockets. These range of wagons are literally only a few pounds more than double O-Gauge models of similar prototypes, and yet they're not starved of detail, and certainly I'm really excited to put this wagon through its paces. So come with me in association with Trainomatic, makers of DCT decoders and accessories that are designed by enthusiasts for enthusiasts. Find the full range available to order now at tramfabrique.co.uk. Additional support for today's video comes from All Mouse Media, publisher of books and graphic novels, which can be found at the link down below. Check them out today, including the amazing Stars books. And I have some amazing news. I've been nominated for Model Rail YouTuber of the Year by the readers of Hornbeat magazine. This is in their upcoming 2022 awards, and this is an all-new category which hasn't been there before. There's 10 YouTube channels that have all been nominated, and I'd like to ask whether you'd take a few moments of your time to go to the link that's in the description box and fill out all of the survey, picking what you think are the best models, the best retailers, the best manufacturers, and above all, the best Model Rail YouTuber of the year 2022. So please lend me your vote if you love this channel. Thanks very much. So come with me and let's see whether this Dapol O-Gauge tank wagon really does live up to expectations. O-Gauge is an amazing scale. It's something that went from being very much the preserve of the modelers with deep pockets or with exceptional rolling stock and locomotive building skills to something that everybody can afford. And actually, I think that O-Gauge models are really offering some exceptional value for money when you compare them to the actual unit cost of what some of the double O models are starting to push. I'd like to thank Dapol for very kindly sending over one of their new Class B tank wagons, and we've got here 7F-063-004, and this is the Class B anchor mounted tank in the Golf livery wagon number 87. Now, tanker cars are something that there's so much variety that is run on Britain's railways, but at the same time a lot of them just haven't been modelled, and it's really nice to see. In fact, actually, as I'm recording this, Dapol have just announced that they're going to be doing the 14-ton Air Ministry wagons in O-Gauge, so they've really got quite a range building of these workhorses of the tanker fleet. Now, whereas before, and we have reviewed models from Dapol, we've had some of these older style tank wagons. This one is modelling a tanker that was built in 1936 for the Lobitos British Refined Oils Company based at Birkenhead. You can see here that this is probably much more of what modelers regard as being a traditional railway tank wagon. But actually there's a transition kind of changeover period, and you can see here this much sleeker design with this Gulf tanker. Now with the tankers, they have different categories depending on what they're carrying, and it's quite a complicated system. So you've got your Class A, which are your very volatile chemicals, things like petrol. You could also have methanol, things like that. Very, very volatile, very, very prone to evaporation, have a very different design of tank to the Class B, which would be diesel fuel, that kind of thing. What really does strike me with this is the amount of weight, and it does feel almost like it's a solid casting of some description. Certainly, Dapol have managed to get a lot of ballast weight into this wagon. The other thing that strikes me is just how nice the colour rendition looks on this wagon. I've seen some Gulf wagons in other scales before where the blue just looked a little bit too blue, but on this wagon Dapol really have captured that rather eye-catching blue of the Gulf wagons really, really well. Under close magnification, it is possible to read some of the detailing on the tanker wagon's chassis, and just over here you can see just about that this tank wagon is one that was built in 1951, so you can see that it is very much nearly 20 years ahead of this style of wagon, and the design differences are very apparent. Whereas we've got an all riveted, quite fabricated chassis, on this it does feel a lot sleeker. There's less rivets on there, and it does look like a much more innovative method of making the prototype was employed. The tank barrel too is held on these central mounts. We don't have these rod stays to stop the tank from breaking free from the chassis. Instead, again, it's a very innovative design of cradle that it sits on, with additional bracing on the first third and second third, as you can see there. There's a lot of gussets on these little cradles as well, and I'm just going to try and get that into the light, and you can see that there is so much detail. It's something that O-Gauge really does afford, that they can make this extremely high level of detail and make it show, make it look much more like the prototype. And it's much easier when you've got a larger model that's being produced. The chassis too is a joy. You can see there it's not a solid thing that we might have seen 20 or 30 years ago. We've got the actual structure of the chassis just like on the prototype, and again that's something that has gone right through all of the range that we get from Dapol. All of the wagons do possess these very open, very prototypically accurate chassis. The wheels themselves are actually sprung, and it's four-corner independently sprung. The springs themselves are hidden away in the axle box, so the springs as modelled are actually dummies, but it does mean that the ride quality of these vehicles is exceptional. It can take in all of the undulations on the track, and that coupled with the really, really quite superior ballast weight on these means that they run so well. And it's something that I do hope to get my garden line renovated over the next few months, so I can actually get some really nice long trains of these running continuously out there. But we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. The brake gear on these is all separately applied parts. The actual brake handle is, to a degree, it does feel like that is posable should you so wish. You just need to slacken off at this end, and you could actually have it with the brakes either pinned all the way on, for example if it was in a siding, or actually pinned to partially on if it was as part of a goods train, although I suspect that they would avoid pinning down the brakes on oil tank wagons carrying flammable liquids, because they wouldn't really want a source of heat and sparks potentially underneath the wagon. And that's where barrier wagons might also come in on a train of these. It is an unfitted wagon still, so you would have barrier wagons between the locomotive and the tank cars, and between the tank cars and the brake van, and that would also give an opportunity to pin down brakes on some of them rather than on the tank wagon, I guess. The barrel of the tank is not just a basic tube. You can see moulded on here the actual plates that this tank wagon body would be rolled from in real life. And they'd be quite thick plates, and the way they do it is you'd have a flat plate, and then you have hydraulic rollers that you run that plate through, and it slowly imparts a bend, and they just keep going and keep going until they've actually rolled it into the perfect barrel shape, and then they would weld along the butt joint, and that's how they would make the tube parts that the tank body was made from. They'd probably be quite thick steel to impart a lot of strength, and then have these correctly domed ends. Again, it's all about the strength. Flat plate has much less strength than if you dome it or curve it, and that's what a lot of these shapes on this are all about. It's about imparting strength without taking up any more material than it absolutely needs to, keeping the actual unladen weight of the wagon down. That also means that it makes it quite a difficult proposition in model form, and looking at this I can see no faults whatsoever that Dapol have captured the really quite intricate shapes and curves, the radii of this tank wagon, from the domed ends to the actual rest of the barrel as it needs to be. The cradle on the bottom really is just a joy to look at. From underneath you can see that the cradle sides are actually just as per the prototype, and we've also got here amongst the chassis detail the bottom unloading pipes. These would have been gravity discharged, and again that's another area where there's a lot of variation between tankers, where you could have them with the bottom discharge, you could have them with the filler at the top where it would actually be siphoned out of the tank wagon. You could get tank wagons where, if they're for carrying very viscous oils like molasses or heavy fuel oil or bitumen, where they actually have steam heating elements in the tankers to lower the viscosity so that the contents could be pumped out. There's so many different variants, and it's nice to see that Dapol are working their way through with these different models. The ladders are separately applied. They're a kind of flexible plastic, but actually they're quite resilient, and they're standing up to a good few knocks and pushes here and showing no signs of damage or coming loose. The walkways on the top, they look like they're checkerboard type material. They're not see-through, they're not an etched plate. I'm not sure that it's trying to model a kind of mesh, but it's not see-through, and you can see that they're glued on these brackets, although there's slightly an excess of glue just on those top two, but it's very, very minor, and any weathering that might be applied, even a light dusting on a tanker such as this, would certainly hide that, no problems at all. The tank filler on the top is again really, really sharp. It's a separately fitted piece, but look at the detail on there. You've got these clamps for clamping it shut, making it completely airtight, and I think they're moulded as part of the moulding. Just giving them a push. They do flex, but they are quite strong. They're not fragile at all there, and certainly that's something that I really think does improve the look of this wagon immensely. We've also got what I suspect is an air valve. Again, separately applied wheel fitted to the top, and this would be for allowing air to enter the tank wagon when unloaded. If you don't do that, it's actually possible to make the tank wagon implode. And that essentially means that the atmospheric pressure, as the pressure in the tank wagon body drops, actually gets enough that it will crush the tank car. And there's some amazing videos online showing tank cars being crushed, and it is quite catastrophic. So this would most likely be a one-way valve to allow air to get into the tank to equalize the pressure as it unloads. And I suspect it might even have been a one-way valve so that you didn't get any fumes or vapors escaping during the unloading process. Printing on the wagon really is good. There's not a huge amount, given that it's a tank wagon, so we've got those huge expanses of blue, but the colour chosen, it's kind of a satin verging on matte colour, and it works really, really well, bringing out all the detail, but not looking garish. Because this is a much later wagon, we've got that overhead electrical warning flash. Because it did have ladders on the side, that was a very stark warning, presumably a warning more to railway staff not to be tempted to, for whatever reason, climb up on the top of the wagon when it was underneath overhead warning flashes. The ladders couldn't be removed because they were necessary as part of the loading and unloading process for personnel at the refinery or the unloading terminal to be able to get up on top to deal with the filler tank and the valve. The single star denotes that it's a Class B tanker. You'll notice on some wagons you get the 2 stars for the Class A. We've also got this separately fitted plate, and again that's really nice. You can actually just about see the air gap behind it. It's fitted on there. It is quite secure. I'm not sure, it may even be metal because it's quite strong, and it says very, very sharply Gulf Oil brackets Great Britain Limited, 6 and 7 Grosvenor Place. This is number 87, refers to the tanker running number. This is London SW1. So this is the ownership plate, and I know that it's got Gulf written on the side, but there's just no question about it with this. And we've got the original builder's plate. You can see here the BR brackets M for Midland region, and this is where it's first registered in January 1951, and that would be its build lot number 183214. Very, very sharp tear weight. This would be 8 tons, 1200 weight, that's just over half a ton, and 3/4 of a hundredweight, I believe, is the final figure there. Further along here, we've got the actual builder's plate from the Hurst Nielsen and Company Limited in Motherwell. So this was actually built in Scotland. And then we've got the wheelbase 10 foot 0 inches. That's important because some places where tank wagons could possibly have been sent might have been such that there would be curves that would only allow a 9 foot wheelbase wagon to just get round, and that is just a warning really not to try and send this round somewhere that it couldn't get round, because you just end up with it climbing the flange and derailing. Load of 14 tons, so actually that's a good load to tear weight ratio. It'll carry 14 tons of actual content, but the wagon itself only weighs just over 8.5 tons. At the front end here we've got, again, I think that might be its railway clearinghouse type plate to say that it conforms to certain standards. We've got standard 14 tons. Again, we've got its, what I think is its lot number and the date 1951. There's a lot of detail going on with that. Even though it's printed flat on the sole bar and it's really sharply done, it's really nice enough that it could pass as being an actual bolted on plate, which the originals would be. Looking to the other side of the model, again we've got a repeat of all of those details along the sole bar, some of them in a slightly different location. On the side here we've got repairs advised Gulf Oil Great Britain Limited, and again it's got the same address. The running number 87, the font is correct, it's a very particular font that Gulf were using, and then we've got the Gulf branding in Gulf orange, and again printed smooth and very, very sharp. The buffers on the chassis are fully sprung, turned metal heads, and they're self-contained, so the spring is somewhere in that shank. And they're really, really necessary in O gauge, so they've got just the right amount of spring. We've also got a sprung drawbar. I can just see underneath, you can see the spring there. That's quite tight actually. I'm just giving it a good push. Yes, it does move. And then we've got the 3-link couplings, and these are fully functional. And actually in O gauge, quite necessary, they seem to be the standard coupling that gets used. Sprung buffers at the other end too. Looking at the wheels, I really do love these. These are a real standout of all of the Dapol O gauge range. We've got 3 whole disc wheels, but it's not a flat disc. If you look there, you can see the dishing on the front. They've got quite a curved shape. Again, this is a really clever way of imparting the strength to the material whilst using an absolute minimum of the material itself, keeping down the tear weight, but also meaning that the wagon itself is much cheaper to build. On the rear of those wheels, again, the rear faces are blackened just like the front faces are, and it does make them look great. We've got actually quite a deep dish in, and again the shape is 100% accurate to that you would see on the underside of the prototype wagons. If you want to get a good look of prototype wheels, actually over on the Wardle Road channel, where he's restoring his brake van, you do get some really good shots of the underside, including just what the inner faces of the wheels on a railway goods wagon do look like, and it's well worth checking that out for a bit more prototype information. Looking at the wagon as a whole, I'm actually really quite taken with this. The blue looks wonderful and really accentuates with the black so well. If I'd have been looking at this, say, in a catalogue, just at a picture of the wagon, I might have been a bit sceptical. This livery is notoriously difficult to get right in model form, but Dapol have done just that, and I really have fallen in love with this tank car. So we turn to the scores. First up is build quality, and actually this wagon has really survived this acute handling of mine really, really well. The printing finish has survived all of my handling, and I do have quite sweaty fingers, so the fact that this has survived that really is a good testament to that, and shows that your wagon will last a very long time, even with plenty of handling. The ladders too are really quite resilient, as is all the detail up here on top, so I just can't fault it. There's a really good weight to it as well, and that just oozes quality through and through. So all in all, with nothing to fault, I'm going to give this a 10 out of 10. On running quality, again, that weight plus the 4-wheel compensated chassis that springs in all 4 corners means that this holds the track incredibly well. On my little test layout, the track is deliberately laid badly, at least that's what I'm going to say about it, but it does mean that this wagon takes it in its stride with no real risk of one of the wheels cocking in the air, causing the wagon to derail. The only area where it might possibly have a small issue, and it really is more of a cosmetic rather than a practical one, is that when it goes through the frog, it does tend to nod just a little bit as the wheels just thump into that slightly overscale V. But really, I suppose that could be more of a comment on the track than the model, but I'm going to give this a 9.9. On DCC fitting and innovation, well, there is no DCC on this. It's another in a long line of really great models coming through from Dapol. They've got the shape right, everything is really just right. For me, the innovation is that 4-wheel sprung chassis. It's something that in days gone by you would have paid a lot of money for a wagon builder to produce a model of, and here we are getting it as standard. It's not a new feature to this tank wagon, it's something that Dapol have added to a number of their previous wagons, and indeed the Lobatos tank wagon that I've got here features that 4-wheel independent sprung chassis, but certainly it's worthy of a mention, and I'm going to give this an 8.7. On accuracy and quality of finish, comparing this tank wagon to the photographs I can find online, it is pretty good. I like that air gap underneath the tank body, just like the prototype. The shape and style of these gussets and the cradle really does match up perfectly. On the brake gear, the brake blocks line up with the wheels, as indeed they should, but they're close enough that you can see there that they hide part of the flange when looking at them side on. They're all perfect. It's assembled the correct way round. Everything about this really is good. The only area where I could possibly draw criticism is the 3-link chains. They just, well, look a little bit like chain. For me, on the end here, you can just see there, we can see where the links are pressed together. It looks a little bit like the chain that the plug in my bathroom is attached to the sink by, and that for me was the only area that really I could fault this, so I'm going to give it a 9.8. On value for money, I'm finding these for around the £46.75 mark, and we've got a link in the description box down below that takes you to Rails of Sheffield to help you find your own version of this and the other Dapol tank wagons. Now let's just let that sink in. £46.75. That's actually only a few pounds more than the 00 version of this from another manufacturer. That's the kind of value for money that O-Gauge from Dapol is offering you. That is incredible value for money. And now, more than ever before, it really is a no-brainer to consider modelling in O-Gauge. You don't need as much stuff to fill your layout, and actually just a few wagons on a small shunting layout actually does look right. I find with O-Gauge there's much less of a temptation to buy up vast rakes of wagons, and the fact that these are only a few pounds more than their 00 counterparts really does put a lot of credence into modelling in O-Gauge. So I'm going to give this a very well deserved 10 out of 10, and that gives us a final score of 48.4. We've got an affiliate link down below in the description box that takes you through to Rails of Sheffield, where you can purchase the model featured in today's video, or alternatively one of the other livery versions that are available. Well, I hope you really enjoyed today's video and found it informative, and I'd love to hear from you in the comments section down below what you thought about this wagon. Is this something that maybe you've already got one, or is it now very firmly on your radar? Is there anything that maybe you spotted in the review that I missed that you want to share with us? I do read all of the comments down below, and it's a really great way of interacting with the channel. But until next time, this is me, Jenny Kirk, saying don't forget to head on over to the Hornby Magazine 2022 Awards and lend me your vote if you appreciate this channel for Model Rail YouTuber of the Year. But until next time, you take great care of yourself. Take care, bye for now. Today's video comes in association with Trainomatic, makers of DCC decoders and accessories that are designed by enthusiasts for enthusiasts. Find the full range available to order now at tramfabrique.co.uk. Additional support for today's video comes from All Mouse Media, publisher of books and graphic novels, which can be found at the link down below. Check them out today, including the amazing Stars books. I'd like to send out a huge thanks to everybody who supports me on Patreon, and an extra special huge thanks goes out to Anthony Kidson, Offshore Allen, Michael Lockie, Helen Sink, Gary Lewis, David Quinn, Sparky107107, George Botterini, Chris Moss, Robert Steers, Sam Yates, Dale Williams, John N from NC, NYMRish, Jonathan Foster, Peter, Clifford Ison, Larry W. Grant, NI Railways 4000 class, Ian Coulson, Alan Dickerson, Eddie Popper, Karen Nichol, Medwin Williams, Crossways Point Junction, 3B Rail, and Jennifer Garrett. Thank you. Without you guys, I couldn't do this.